General, you have such great knowledge and deep understanding of Afghanistan. You mentioned in your statement today that you were first deployed there in 2002 and that you've commanded troops there every single year since then, which is truly extraordinary. I also know that you've studied closely the history of Afghanistan. In fact, one of the first times that we met, you told me you were reading The Great Game and that you were seeking to learn from the British and the Soviet experience in Afghanistan. At one point, the Soviets had more than 100,000 troops in Afghanistan, and yet they did not prevail. Now, clearly, our goals in Afghanistan are completely different from the goals of the British and Afghanistan, but the British and the Soviets. But still, that history, the British and the Soviet experience, gives me pause, no matter how brilliant our leaders, how brave our troops, how successful the civilian surge. Could you share with us what lessons you take away from the failed British and Soviet experiences in Afghanistan and why you believe that our experience can end up in a more positive way?
One of the things I have learned is to be very, very humble about thinking that we have the right idea, the better idea, and to be very, very careful as we go forward. I think the common themes that I see that caused failure in the past is when the Afghan people come to the conclusion that an outside force are either occupiers or they are culturally in opposition to the currents of Afghan history. In fact, Afghan leaders, Afghans have been toppled from power because they went against the grain of the sense of the people, the social fabric of the people. My view of both the British experience and the Soviet experience is there came a time when there coalesced a sense, almost antibodies in Afghan society against their presence. In the Soviet case, we can't be too superior thinking about this because they did a lot of things correctly. They did a lot of tactical things correctly. They did a lot of programs correctly. But at the end of the day, they couldn't change the perception that they were outside occupiers trying to impose on Afghanistan a foreign system, a foreign thought process of, in this case, it was communism, but it was also a number of other social changes that just ran against the grain of society. So I think it's very important that from a overall point of view, we understand how Afghan culture must define itself, and we be limited in our desire to change the fundamentals of it. We've got to respect those, and I think that's important. And then tactically in the counterinsurgence system, of course, the Soviets became fairly heavy-handed, and they killed more than 1 million Afghans in the process. And of course, that worked to cause their defeat. One of the reasons why we're working so hard on counterinsurgency with and respecting the people is because we understand it's only with their partnership that we can be effective here. So it's a very careful strategy, almost admitting what we don't know. What I tell people is every time you go to do something in Afghanistan, realize there's a lot of things going on you don't understand, and don't pretend that it's more simple than it really is.
I think those are very wise lessons indeed. When I look at the president's plan and his date for beginning the transition and the withdrawal of forces, well, I share the concerns of some of my colleagues about the signal that sends. It may, in fact, be a helpful signal because it shows that we're not like the Soviets, that we're not trying to stay there and impose our way of life on them. So it may cut both ways. Ambassador, let me ask you about another issue that troubles me greatly. We know that the Taliban is securing funding for its operations from the narcotics trade in Afghanistan. But another source, another significant source, is from wealthy individuals and bogus charitable organizations, or charitable organizations that have two purposes, from the Middle East, from Saudi Arabia, for example. Do we have a strategy for engaging the countries whose citizens are funneling money to the Taliban fighters?
In short, yes, we do, Senator. It's a pretty robust strategy. You're correct. Sources of Taliban funding right now, it comes from profits from narco trafficking, increasingly from taxation of areas that they might dominate. And then the third important source of funding is external funding, coming from cover NGOs and individuals from the Gulf and Pakistan itself. Against that, we have a very vigorous law enforcement effort where we're trying to track finances, and we are working very closely with countries within the Gulf, to include Saudi Arabia, United Arab Republic, and others, in order to try to get at these sources and find ways to shut it down.
And are you optimistic about securing full cooperation from the Gulf countries?
We're making some progress there, Senator. I wouldn't want to get into the specifics, but if you'd like, for the record, perhaps we can submit something to you. Progress being made, but it's a difficult fight. Trying to track finances in any kind of environment is difficult work, but we are making progress.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Collins. Senator